the sacred warnings of Padre Pio.
She prayed every day, not occasionally, not when things were difficult. Every day, the rosary before the children woke up, the Divine Mercy Chaplet in the afternoon, Mass 3 times a week, sometimes 4. She was not doing it for appearances. She genuinely loved it. And her husband was disappearing, not dramatically. He hadn't left. He still sat in the same pew, drove the same route home, ate dinner at the same table. From the outside, nothing was wrong. But she knew something in him had gone somewhere she couldn't reach, a flatness behind the eyes, a quality of absence even when he was present. He said the right words at the right moments. He went through the motions with a thoroughness she could not criticize, not technically. But the presence was gone. She had prayed for him. She had gone to confession for herself. She had asked her pastor what to do about a husband who seemed to be drifting from his faith. Her pastor had given her good advice about patience and continued prayer. He hadn't asked the question that would have changed everything, and Padre Pio, who asked that question from his confessional at San Giovanni Rotondo, would not have counseled patience. He would have said, "Bring me the one who is holding this," because what Padre Pio could see, that most of us cannot, is the invisible mechanism operating inside a sacramental marriage, the channel through which grace flows from one spouse to the other, the way a covenant works not merely as a legal bond, 2 people bound by a promise, but in the spiritual economy, as a living pipe, a conduit, a directed channel of grace designed to flow through the marital bond, not around it. And what he could see when a woman came to him like this, devout, faithful, genuinely confused, was whether the pipe was open, or whether someone had quietly, without fully realizing it, been blocking it for years. My name is Raymond. I spent 35 years teaching Catholic theology at a high school in Covington, Kentucky. I retired believing I had a solid understanding of how sacramental marriage works. Then I read Padre Pio's Epistolario, all 4 volumes. And then I attended Father Chad Ripperger's conference on spiritual warfare and marriage in 2018. What I found in those 2 sources, cross-referenced, documented, theologically grounded, was something I had never taught in 35 years. The wife is not passive in the spiritual economy of her marriage. She is not simply a recipient of whatever spiritual state her husband maintains. She is an active agent in the covenant, and that agency, her interior dispositions toward her husband, has direct effects on what grace reaches him. Not symbolically, not metaphorically. In the actual structure of the spiritual economy the Church's sacramental theology describes. I don't say this to place blame. I say it because the woman I am speaking to tonight needs the mechanism explained. Not the sentiment, not the reassurance, not the platitude about patience. She needs the mechanism. Because if she has it, she can do something with it tonight. Stay with me, I want to tell you about a woman named Dolores, late 50s, a parishioner at my parish in Covington. She led the women's Bible study on Tuesday mornings. She organized the parish Rosary Guild. She was a daily communicant, the kind of person the parish quietly depends on in a dozen ways that nobody formally acknowledges. She came to see me in the autumn of 2003, not about herself, about her husband Frank. Frank was 61. He'd been a good Catholic man for most of their marriage, Sunday Mass, Easter duty, the occasional rosary when things were hard, steady, present. But in the past 4 years, something had changed. He still went to Mass. He sat in the pew. He went through the motions with care. But the presence was gone. He no longer initiated prayer. He'd stopped asking about her Bible study. He was not hostile, not angry. He was simply somewhere else, even when he was sitting across the dinner table. Stone-faced, she said. Not cold exactly, just absent. She assumed he was losing his faith. She asked me what she should do about Frank. I listened to everything she told me. Then I asked her one question. Dolores, what did Frank do that you've never fully forgiven? 3 full seconds of silence. She looked at me with the specific expression of a woman who has been asked a question she has been very carefully not asking herself. Then she said, "He knows what he did." I recognized that answer immediately. After 35 years with families in crisis, You learn to hear what is in the spaces between words. What Dolores said in those 5 words was not anger. It was not grief. It was a ledger, a quietly, precisely maintained account, the kind that doesn't require regular consultation because the balance is already known. The kind held by a woman who had decided, not dramatically, not consciously, but conclusively, that the account was still open. She had not decided to hate Frank. She hadn't. She genuinely loved him in the ordinary ways, cooked his meals, kept his house, prayed for him every day. She had simply decided somewhere along the way that the specific debt remained, and she had renamed what she was carrying so she didn't have to examine it too closely. She called it being realistic about what he was capable of. She called it protecting her own heart. She called it simply knowing where things stood. She had never once called it unforgiveness. But Padre Pio would have seen it in 30 seconds, and he would have named exactly what it was doing to Frank. There is a documented account I return to every time I encounter this pattern. A woman came to Padre Pio's confessional at San Giovanni Rotondo, a devout woman, faithful, regular in her sacramental practice, seeking counsel about her spiritual life. Padre Pio listened to her confession. Then he stopped her. He said, "The sin I see is not what you have done, it is what you refuse to release." She insisted she had confessed everything. She had examined her conscience carefully. He said, "You are still holding the knife." This exchange, preserved in testimonies collected by Forres Alessio Parente and corroborated in C. Bernard Ruffin's documented account of Padre Pio's confessional practice, is one of the most important things Padre Pio ever said about the interior life of a married woman. Not because it condemns her, but because of what it reveals about his understanding of what unforgiveness does in the invisible economy of a covenant. He did not refuse her absolution because she had committed an obvious sin. He refused because he could see something she could not. He could see what her hidden unforgiveness was doing to the man she had vowed to cover. That is the part most people miss. He was not primarily concerned with the wound to her own soul, though that concerned him too. He was concerned with what the wound was doing to the husband who was, through no fault of his own, being spiritually drained by a mechanism his wife didn't know was operating. And then Padre Pio used an image I have never been able to forget since I first encountered it in the documented accounts of his pastoral vision. He described what he saw when he looked at a wife holding an unresolved grudge against her husband. She fills a cup every day for him. Every prayer, every mass, every rosary, she fills it for him. And he drinks nothing, because the cup has a hole in the bottom. I need to explain the theology behind what Padre Pio was seeing, because it is not abstract and it is not metaphorical. It is a description of how the sacrament of marriage actually functions in the economy of grace. When a man and woman receive the sacrament of marriage, they are not simply making a promise to each other in God's presence. They are constituting a sacramental bond, a living covenant unit, through which God intends to channel grace specifically toward them, through them, and through that bond to anyone sheltered within it. The grace of the sacrament does not travel independently of the bond. It travels through it. This is why Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 7 that the unbelieving spouse is sanctified through the believing partner. Not converted, not saved. Sanctified, covered, reached, touched by grace through the channel of the covenant that exists between them. The channel works in both directions. The wife covers the husband covers the wife. Now, when Dr. Chad Ripperger, exorcist, philosopher, theological physician of spiritual pathology, describes what chronic unforgiveness does inside a sacramental marriage, he is describing what happens to that channel when one partner closes it from their end. He makes a distinction I want to be precise about. Last week I talked about the open door created by going to sleep in unresolved anger. One night's anger, allowed to lie unaddressed. A singular recurring choice that, repeated night after night, creates a sustained invitation. What Dolores was carrying was something different. Ripperger calls it the demolished wall. A grudge held across months or years, not the recurring anger of ongoing conflict, but the settled, normalized bitterness of something decided. The account kept quietly, accurately, without ever being fully examined. The thing that has been renamed so many times, realism, self-protection, healthy boundaries, just knowing where things stand, that the person carrying it no longer experiences it as unforgiveness at all. She experiences it as clarity. And that is precisely what makes it the most effective demonic strategy in marriage, because the recurring open door of nightly anger requires a decision every night. There is a daily moment of at least semi-conscious participation. The demolished wall requires no such participation. It was established once, at the moment the grudge was normalized, and has been maintained automatically ever since. The woman carrying it is not consciously choosing every morning to withhold forgiveness. She stopped having to choose. The position became the default. And because she stopped experiencing it as a choice, she also stopped experiencing it as sin. She comes to confession faithfully. She examines her conscience carefully. She confesses what she has done, what she has failed to do. She does not confess the grudge, because she has not named it as a grudge in 4 years. She has named it something else. And Padre Pio, who could see through every renaming with the precision of a man who had spent 50 years in the confessional reading souls, would not absolve her. Not because he condemned her, because he could see what the unnamed thing was doing. To her, to Frank, to the channel between them that had been slowly, silently drying up while she filled the cup every day, and he drank nothing. The scripture Ripperger invokes for this mechanism is one most Catholics know, but very few have read with their full attention. Matthew 18, verse 35. Jesus finishes the parable of the unforgiving servant with a sentence usually softened in English translation: "So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you, if you do not forgive your brother from your heart." What precedes that sentence is the detail most people skip. The king delivered him to the jailers, to the torturers, until he should pay all his debt. The torturers, not an emotional consequence, a transfer to custodians whose function is specifically to inflict what justice requires. And notice what happened to the servant's own forgiven debt. It was not simply suspended. It was reversed. The enormous mercy extended to him became, through his refusal to extend it, a weight reenacted against him. Ripperger's exegesis is precise. Unforgiveness does not merely fail to help you. It actively reverses the flow of grace in both directions, blocking what you would receive and blocking what would flow through you to others, including your husband, especially your husband. Because in a covenant relationship, the bond through which grace flows is not neutral. It is directed. It is specific. It is the channel God established between two people who vowed themselves to each other before him. When a wife holds a chronic, normalized grudge against her husband, she does not merely fail to fill the cup. She puts a hole in the bottom. Every prayer she prays for him, and she may pray many sincerely, leaks out through the grudge she has not released. Ripperger uses a phrase that I have thought about many times since I first encountered it. Such litigation in the spiritual realm draws the attention of the enemy who delights in all spiritual courtrooms. A grudge held in a covenant relationship is, in the spiritual economy, a form of ongoing litigation. The wife is holding a debt open against the husband. The debt creates a recognized position of contention inside the bond that was established as a channel of protection. And the enemy, who operates with the patience of a being who has been studying this architecture since before the world was made, enters through the litigation, not because he was summoned, because there is an open case. And he is always willing to take the side against grace. Frank was not losing his faith. That is the thing Dolores did not know. That is what nobody had told her when she came to me asking what to do about her drifting husband. Frank was being starved. He woke up. He went to work. He came home. He sat in the pew. The exterior was intact. From any observable measure, Frank was a man maintaining his practice, even if the vitality was fading. Ripperger identifies this as one of the most common and most misunderstood presentations in the spiritual pathology of Catholic marriage. The husband who appears to be drifting. He still goes to Mass. He still receives communion. But something is evacuating from the interior. The prayer that once felt like something now feels like nothing. He reaches for God in the morning and touches air. The connections that once were alive, the sense of being seen by something larger than himself, of being accompanied, have gone quiet. He assumes it is his own fault. Maybe his faith was never as deep as he thought. Maybe this is what happens to a man in his 60s. He does not connect it to anything in the house. He does not connect it to his wife's interior life. He has no framework for the idea that the channel through which grace was reaching him, the covenant bond between himself and the woman he married, has a hole in it, that the woman who prays for him every day is filling the cup from her end every morning, and it is running out before it reaches him. He is not drifting. He is being starved by a mechanism neither of them can see. And Padre Pio, who saw it in 30 seconds through the confessional grate, would not have counseled patience. He would have asked the woman, "What are you still holding?" I want to be precise about something important here. I am not saying that Frank's spiritual condition is his wife's fault. That framing is both theologically imprecise and pastorally destructive. Frank has his own soul, his own will, his own responsibility before God for what he does with the grace available to him. What I am saying is something more specific. In the economy of a sacramental covenant, one spouse's interior disposition toward the other is not neutral with respect to the flow of grace. It has effects that operate independent of the other person's knowledge or consent. The husband does not need to know about the grudge for the grudge to affect the channel between them, and the wife does not need to intend the effects for the effects to occur. This is what Ripperger means when he describes the demolished wall. A singular open door requires active participation to maintain. Someone has to keep choosing not to close it. The demolished wall is different. Once the grudge is normalized, once it has been renamed and integrated into the ordinary framework of how things are, the destruction is not being actively chosen. It is simply the condition. The wall is down. The enemy was invited in once, and the invitation was never revoked. He has residency. And the husband living inside that marriage, devout, confused, reaching for God and touching air, is living inside a house from which a wall has been quietly removed. He feels the cold. He cannot find the draft. When I explained this to Dolores, not as accusation, not as condemnation, but as mechanism, she went very quiet. She looked out the window for a long moment. Then she said, "I haven't thought of it as unforgiveness for a long time." I said, "What have you thought of it as?" A long pause. "Knowing the truth about who he is." That sentence. I have heard variations of it in many different conversations over many years. Not anger, not hatred, not resentment exactly. Just the ledger, the accurate account. The settled certainty of a woman who has decided that clear-eyed realism about her husband's limitations is not unforgiveness. It is just honesty. Ripperger identifies this specific posture, the grudge so thoroughly normalized that it presents not as bitterness but as clarity, as one of the most effective demonic strategies in Catholic marriage, precisely because it cannot be detected through ordinary self-examination. A woman examining her conscience for unforgiveness will think of unforgiveness as something she feels: hot, angry, resentful, bitter. She will not recognize the ledger, because the ledger doesn't feel like anything anymore. It just is. And Padre Pio, who saw through what people felt to what they were holding, would have said, "You have been calling it something else for so long that you have forgotten it has another name. And that name is what I cannot absolve you of today. Come back when you are ready to release it. I want to sit with the epistolario evidence for a moment." Padre Pio wrote to Raffaellina Serase, documented in Volume 2 of the Epistolario, letters from around 1914 and 1915, these words: "I cannot understand how it is possible to be bitter and slanderous and at the same time truly love Jesus." He did not frame it as a legal question. He framed it as a statement of spiritual logic. Bitterness and genuine love of Jesus are incompatible, not because God arbitrarily punishes the bitter, because bitterness by its nature closes the interior faculty that receives love. A closed fist toward God, his phrase, not mine, cannot simultaneously receive what God is offering. And he went further in letters to other spiritual daughters. Unforgiveness left unchecked was not merely a personal wound, it was a closed fist extended toward God, one that prevented grace from flowing to all under the same spiritual roof. All under the same spiritual roof. Frank was under the same spiritual roof. The closed fist was not pointed at him exactly. It was held against an old wound, but in the economy of the sacrament, in the living architecture of the covenant, the effects of the closed fist do not stay inside the person holding it. They drain the channel. The cup has a hole, and the man who has been praying, working, attending Mass, reaching for something that doesn't seem to arrive, that man is drinking from a cup with a hole in the bottom. He doesn't know why the cup is empty. He only knows that he is thirsty. There is something in the letter to the Colossians that I want to add here, because the Greek matters. Colossians 3:13. Most English translations read, bearing with one another and forgiving each other. The word translated as forgiving is the Greek charizomenoi, from charis and grace, gift. Charizomenoi does not mean settling a debt. It does not mean closing a case. It means giving as a gift what was not earned, what cannot be repaid, what the other person has no standing to expect. It is the opposite of the ledger. The ledger says, this debt is owed and remains open. Charizomenoi says, I am releasing this not because the debt was paid, not because the account has been corrected, but because I am choosing to give as gift what I have the legal right to hold. Ripperger notes that a grudge held in a covenant relationship functions in the spiritual realm as a sustained litigation. The person holding the grudge is, in the spiritual economy, an active litigant against their spouse. Every morning that Dolores woke up and went to prayer without releasing the account, she was renewing the case, not by choosing to renew it, by failing to close it. The charizomenoi forgiveness is the specific act that closes the case, not feeling more charitable toward Frank, not waiting until she felt ready, choosing, deliberately, specifically, from the will, rather than the emotions, to release what she had the right to hold. I asked Dolores to do something she resisted for 2 weeks. I asked her to stand at the foot of her bed, the place where the covenant is most physically immediate, and speak aloud to God what she was releasing. She resisted because it felt too easy. She had been carrying this for years. The idea that she could simply say some words and be done with it felt like dismissing what Frank had done, like she was being asked to pretend it didn't matter. I told her she was not being asked to pretend. She was being asked to perform a legal act. The grudge had established a spiritual position by being named and maintained internally, silently, daily. Every day it continued without being addressed. It operated in the spiritual economy. The releasing needed to be spoken, specific, explicit, deliberate, for the same reason the grudge had accumulated through silence. Because silence in the spiritual economy is not neutral. The silence in which she had carried the account had done damage. The spoken word of release, named, directed, deliberate, would begin to close what the silence had kept open. She did it after 2 weeks of resistance, alone in her bedroom. Frank was downstairs. She stood at the foot of the bed, and she said words she had written out beforehand, because she did not trust herself to find them in the moment. She told me later she wept through most of it. Not from grief exactly, from the recognition of how long she had been carrying something she had renamed so many times she'd stopped knowing what it was. The following Saturday, she went to confession. She did not say, I have been unforgiving. She said what it actually was. I have carried a specific grudge against my husband for 4 years, and I have renamed it so I didn't have to give it up. She named the thing Frank had done. She named the years. She named every alias she had given the account. The priest absolved her. 6 weeks later, she called me. Frank had asked to pray the rosary with her, not because she had said anything to him, not because she had asked him, not because there had been any conversation between them about his spiritual condition. He had walked into the kitchen one evening where she was sitting after dinner and said, "Do you want to say the rosary?" First time in 4 years. He did not know what she had released. He only knew, and this is the phrase she reported to me, that he felt, in his own words, like something had lifted. He couldn't say what. He just felt it. I want to stay with that for a moment, because it goes to the heart of what Padre Pio understood. Frank was not changed through confrontation. Dolores never told him what she had been carrying. She never asked him to account for himself again. She did not initiate any conversation about the wound, or the years, or the account. She simply closed the case in the spiritual economy. And the grace she had been filling the cup with every morning through prayer and mass and the rosary, the grace that had been leaking out through the hole, began to arrive. The pipe was open. The channel was no longer obstructed by the litigation she had been maintaining. And Frank, who had no idea what had happened, who had no theological framework for any of this, who simply noticed that one morning he felt different, Frank began to come back, not because he was confronted, not because he was pressured, because the channel through which grace was meant to reach him had been unblocked, and grace, when the channel is open, moves. This is what the documented testimonies of Padre Pio's penitents show, again and again. Women who released the grudge and then watched their husbands change without being told anything. The husband who starts going to daily mass, the husband who stops drinking, the husband who walks into the kitchen on a Thursday evening and asks if she wants to say the rosary, not because the wife fixed the husband, because the wife stopped being an obstruction to the grace that was trying to reach him. Padre Pio, who saw this mechanism from the inside, called it precisely what it was. She had been filling the cup every day. He had been drinking nothing, and when she stopped holding the hole open, what she had always been pouring began, finally, to reach him. Now I want to name something carefully, because there is a version of what I have been saying that could be misheard as a form of spiritual manipulation. If you release the grudge because you want Frank to come back to the rosary, if the release is a strategy for the desired outcome, you have not performed the charizomenoi act. You have performed a transaction. Ripperger is specific about this distinction. Forgiveness that functions as spiritual leverage is not gift forgiveness. It is a more sophisticated form of the same litigation. The spiritual economy is not a vending machine. Dolores released the account because it was the right thing to do. Because she had been holding something that did not belong in a covenant. Because the Lord had forgiven her more than she had been asked to forgive Frank. And the refusal to extend what had been extended to her was, in the precise language of Matthew 18, a reversal of the very mercy she depended on. She released it because it was the just thing. The outcome was grace. The outcome was Frank at the foot of the stairs asking about the rosary. But the outcome is not the reason. The reason is the thing Padre Pio named when he said, "It is what you refuse to release." And what follows from the releasing is grace's own business. I want to speak now to the woman who has been listening to this in the specific kind of quiet that comes not from disagreement, but from recognition. She prays every day. She goes to Mass. She is not the villain of any story she tells herself, and something in her marriage has been going quiet. Maybe it is dramatic. A husband who has stopped praying, stopped engaging, stopped coming alive in the ways faith used to make him come alive. Maybe it is subtle, a flatness, a distance, a quality of absence she can't point to specifically. I am not saying the grudge is the only variable. Marriage is complex. Husbands carry their own wounds, their own failures, their own closed fists. But I am asking you to look at your own side of the channel tonight. Not because it will make you feel worse, because it is the only side you can actually do something about. Ripperger offers a diagnostic test that I want to give you precisely because it is more revealing than any questionnaire. If your husband died tonight, suddenly without warning, would your first reaction be grief, or would there be underneath the grief a flicker of relief? Not a wish that he would die, not a desire, just a flicker of quiet. The sense that something exhausting had finally ended. If the honest answer, the one you think before you edit it, contains even a small relief, even a moment of it alongside the grief, you are holding something. It does not matter what you call it. It does not matter that you have justified it. It is a debt held open in a covenant relationship, and in the spiritual economy of that covenant, it has a name and an effect. Padre Pio could see that effect through the confessional grate, the cup with the hole in the bottom, and the man on the other side of the wall of the ordinary life you share, who has been drinking nothing. Here is what I want you to do. Not eventually, tonight, this week. 3 steps. I am calling this the Forgiveness Unlocking Protocol. Not an emotional exercise, but a spiritual and juridical unlocking of what the grudge has locked. The first step is tonight, 15 minutes, alone, with a blank piece of paper. Right at the top, what I have renamed so I don't have to call it unforgiveness. Then list every grievance against your husband that you now call something else, being realistic about who he is. Self-protection, having appropriate expectations after what happened, not forgetting so it doesn't happen again. Emotional self-care, just how things are between us now. Write them all, every alias, every name you have, given the account so you didn't have to look at what it actually is. Then answer Ripperger's diagnostic question honestly. The paper makes it real in a way the interior thought cannot. The interior thought can be deflected, revised, minimized. The written word sits on the page and asks to be acknowledged. What you write down is what can be brought to what closes it. The second step is this week, tonight if you are ready, or on the specific night you choose. Stand at the foot of your bed, the place of the covenant. Speak these words aloud, not in your head, in spoken, audible, deliberate, because what accumulated in the silence needs to be met by something more substantial than more silence. Say this, name, before God and before Our Lady, I release the debt I have held against you. I do not release it because what you did was right. I do not release it because I feel ready. I release it because I have been blocking the grace that God intends to flow through me to you, and I choose tonight to stop blocking it. Lord, I release what I have been holding. Let the pipe be open again. Send grace to this man through the channel you created between us. I ask this through the intercession of Padre Pio, who could see what I couldn't. Amen. This is not reconciliation with harmful behavior. This is not a statement that what happened was acceptable. This is a legal act in the spiritual economy. You are closing the case. You are releasing the litigation. You are removing the hole from the bottom of the cup. And you are doing it not because you feel like it. You may not feel like it at all. But because it is the just thing, the obedient thing, the thing that the covenant requires of you, and that your husband, who has no idea this is happening, desperately needs from you. The third step is within 7 days. Confession. Not a general confession, not simply, I have been unforgiving in my marriage. A specific one. Tell the priest, I have carried a specific grudge against my husband for a name how many years, and I have not called it unforgiveness. I have called it, and then name every alias you wrote on the paper. Be that specific. Padre Pio's standard was never the vague admission. He wanted the thing named. He refused absolution to the penitent who arrived with carefully managed categories and well-organized disclosures. He wanted the specific thing, the actual account, the real name of what was being held. Bring it named and specific to the priest. Ask him to pray the prayer of command over the legal right that the grudge established. That prayer, spoken by a priest with the authority of holy orders, closes the case in the spiritual economy with a juridical finality that the spoken declaration alone cannot provide. The declaration closes your end. The absolution closes the enemy's standing claim. Both are necessary. Both are within your reach this week. Dolores called me 6 weeks after that Saturday confession. She did not call to report that everything was fixed. She described something quieter and more real than that. She said the weight she had been carrying, the weight she had gotten so used to that she'd stopped noticing it had a weight, was gone. Not fading, not lighter. Gone. She hadn't realized how much energy the account had been costing her until she stopped maintaining it. And she told me about Frank asking to say the rosary. She said he seemed surprised by himself when he asked, like something had moved in him he hadn't been waiting for or expecting. She never told Frank what she had done. He only knew that one evening, sitting in the ordinary quiet of their ordinary life, he felt, in his words, like something had lifted, like something that had been pressing on him from a direction he couldn't identify had simply stopped. He picked up his beads. He asked if she wanted to pray, and she said yes, not because she had managed him, or strategized him, or prayed for a specific outcome, because she had stopped being an obstruction to what God had been trying to send him through the channel he created between them. The pipe was open. And grace, when the channel is open, moves. I want to close with something Padre Pio wrote that I return to often. In his letters to spiritual daughters, Epistolario, Volume 2, from around 1914 and 1915, he describes a vine deprived of water, not immediately dead, not visibly dying, still producing leaves, still appearing from a distance like a healthy vine, but inwardly beginning to fail. Something happening at the root level, in the invisible interior that the exterior does not yet reveal. He applied this image to a soul whose prayer life was technically intact, going through the forms, maintaining the exterior architecture of faithfulness, but whose heart was closed against another person. The vine that appears healthy from the outside, the vine that someone stopped watering from the inside. Frank still went to Mass. Frank still sat in the pew. Frank was the vine. And Dolores, who prayed for him every morning and filled the cup every day, was the one who had stopped the water from reaching him. Not because she intended it, because the hole in the bottom of the cup does not require intention. It only requires a grudge maintained long enough, normalized enough, renamed enough, that the person holding it has stopped knowing they are holding it. And Padre Pio, who could see through every renaming, who saw the hole in the bottom of the cup and the vine going quiet, and the husband drinking nothing, Padre Pio would not counsel patience tonight. He would say, release what you are holding, not because your husband deserves it, not because it will feel good, not because you are ready, because the vine on the other side of the wall is waiting for water, and you are the channel, and the pipe can be open again tonight. Before you go, I want to say one thing to the woman who has spent this video in the specific kind of quiet that comes from recognition rather than disagreement. You are not the villain of this story. You never were. You are a woman who was wounded, who did what wounded people do, who found a way to protect herself, that felt like clarity and felt like realism, and never felt like what it actually was. You are a woman who has been praying every day and filling the cup every morning. You have been doing the thing you knew how to do. What I am offering you tonight is simply the other thing, the thing Padre Pio saw through the grate, the mechanism that makes the prayer you are already praying actually reach the man you are praying it for. Stand at the foot of the bed, say the words. Go to confession this week and name the thing by its real name. Let the pipe be open again. Your husband does not know he is thirsty, but the grace that is trying to reach him through you knows exactly where to go when you stop holding the hole open. God bless you, and stay vigilant.